I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about the harm I was causing. I didn't care about myself. I would get paid and in 30 minutes my paychecks would be gone. I was still thinking about all the money I lost. So I went back the next day and I gambled all of that money plus whatever else I could get out of my checking account. And I just remember for the first time, really, the thoughts of self-harm were so strong. Like, they were so strong.
Today's guest is Christina Cook. She shares her story of gambling addiction and recovery and how she became a podcaster to help others follow along the same path. But before we get into her story, I have just one favor to ask from you. There's so many of you that watch this channel regularly, but you haven't yet hit that subscribe button. So if you could do me the favor of just hitting that subscribe button, then I'm going to continue to work hard every single day to make sure that the world knows that gambling addiction is real, but so is the help that's out there.
So I'm Christina Cook, and I am the host of the Broke Girl Society podcast and founder of the Broke Girl Society support group.
And what is that support group seeking to accomplish?
So my work for the Broke Girl Society is based on my own experience with gambling. I wanted to create a safe space for women who've been impacted by gambling, whether it's the gambler themselves or their loved ones, to try and better understand how to help support the one that's struggling with gambling.
And so the reason that you got involved with this kind of work is because of your own experience with gambling?
Yes, I struggled with gambling for about 15 years before I entered recovery. I was 28 when I started gambling, found recovery at 42, and now I just celebrated 4 years of recovery.
Awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Maybe for the audience that hasn't seen us have a conversation before, we can kind of go back in time here. Take us back to that first time that you gambled. What was it? What made you do it? How'd you feel?
Yeah, so gambling really wasn't a part of my life growing up. Where I'm from, Oklahoma, gambling didn't really impact our state until the early 2000s. And we had maybe a few racetracks, a few bingo halls, but it wasn't at the capacity it is now. And so casinos started popping up in the early 2000s, and kind of the later part of the 2007, 2008, I found myself going through a life change. I was going through a divorce, and I was 28 years old. And so what I was struggling with is going through this divorce, I felt really alone in the process because all my friends were either getting married or they were having babies. And I was struggling to be in the spaces where they were talking about nurseries and baby shoes, and I was like, I cannot have another conversation about baby clothes, and it was really kind of a struggle. And so I kind of found myself looking for something to do to kind of get away from those conversations and just kind of get out of the house. And I had struggled with infertility in my marriage, and so I was just really kind of trying to get away from everything that was really hard in those moments. And so I wasn't somebody that really enjoyed the bars, and they had just built a new casino near my house. And so I thought, that seems safe. It was well lit. It's always hindsight, right? And so I started going normally, every once in a while. I'd go on a Friday night just to kind of, like I said, escape some of those situations and just to get out of the house. It started pretty innocently.
And when you went there, were you like a slots player? Were you on the tables? Like what did you enjoy doing when you were there?
Yeah, I was 100% a slot player. I didn't play table games. I didn't really do any kind of other gambling but the slot machines.
What was it about the slots that drew you in?
I think the excitement, the sounds, the lights. Like, I would go and set and it would just be so fun. Like, there could be a potential bonus. It was never really about, I think, the amount of money I'd win. I think it was more just kind of the thrill of being there, and it was really entertaining. I enjoyed it.
Early on in the experience, was it, you mentioned that it was enjoyable. Were you having some wins along the way that kind of motivated you to think like, this is a good thing to be doing?
Well, what's interesting is I didn't really win a lot. I didn't really play a lot when I first started playing. I remember sitting in a machine and betting 25 cents and going through $5 and being like, oh, I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe I spent my money on something like that. And then it would just progressively, like, I still kind of remember like putting a 20 in and betting 60 cents. And, you know, I can see the progression in myself and in just my gambling. At that time, I only took what I could afford to lose. So it was like entertainment money, like what I'd spend at the movies on a Friday night or going out to dinner with friends. And so it didn't really register with me, you know, as I kept kind of bringing a little bit more money each time I went. And I really love the social aspect of the casino as well. I started making friends there, and it kind of replaced some of those relationships that I just wasn't relating to. And so I think for me, it was just the atmosphere and the possibility that I might win.
I mean, it sounds like, for all intents and purposes, this was something that was really enjoyable and really fun at first and almost a comfort. At what point did you notice things maybe changing?
I think things kind of started to change for me when I entered a relationship that was not good. I never really understood my situation with my divorce. I just kind of jumped into another relationship that also wasn't great. In the beginning of the relationship, it was fine. It was normal. It was a lot of the love bombing and, like, you know, all those good things. And I remember kind of at that time, I didn't gamble as much. Like, I kind of was invested in this relationship and but as time went on and the relationship kind of continued to build, things were starting to happen. And I didn't quite understand what was going on with me. Like, there were lots of parts that I liked about the relationship. And it's kind of, think about it, similar to my gambling, like in that relationship. Like, it starts out okay, but then things just start happening, and it wasn't a physical kind of abuse. It was a very emotional, very verbally abusive. And I think as I lost control of myself, for some reason I couldn't find a way out of it, I started leaning into my gambling to help me cope with how I was feeling. For some reason, I felt like I had control at the casino. I felt like it was a safe place for me. It wasn't saying mean things to me, and it wasn't making me question my decisions. And I know somebody probably watching this is like, why didn't you just leave the relationship? Like, I don't think any of us want to be in an abusive relationship. Any of us want to be in an addictive situation, but I think just the way that we learn to navigate life, we don't always stand up for ourselves. We don't always make the right decisions. It's based on kind of the patterns we've crafted. And I found myself in this relationship that I couldn't really understand or define, and I just continued leaning into my gambling because it made me feel better.
You know what, to a certain extent, I can relate to that. I had a lot of issues with my ex, and when I was gambling, I would basically use it as a distraction from having to actually deal with the problems that we were creating together. I can relate to this feeling of wanting to escape. Do you feel like it's fair to say that the gambling transitioned from something that was a fun hobby to something that was an escape?
Oh, 100%. Like, I leaned into my gambling for so many life situations. I won my first jackpot the day my mom had a massive heart attack.
Wow.
And I remember the night before, and we were living together. She kept complaining of heartburn. And when I said, well, maybe we need to go to the hospital, she was like, no, I had a box of tamales earlier. And she just kept kind of leaning back to that. My mother is a very stubborn woman. We kind of monitored it, and then I went to bed. But when I woke up the next morning, she had been up all night with this discomfort. And I said, well, we need to go to the hospital. And she's like, no, I called the doctor. They told me to come in at like 10. So we went to the doctor, and I love my mother more than anything. She raised me and my sisters all on her own. So we had a very, very good relationship, and I didn't want anything to happen to her. We go to the doctor, and so they run a test, and they kind of thought maybe it was her gallbladder. And I remember this moment so vivid. The doctor started to walk out of the room, like standing at the door, and she says, you know what, let's do an EKG. She's like, I just want to be sure. And so they did, and then all panic ensued. She had been having a heart attack. And so fortunately, we were just right across the street from the hospital, and they did the whole rushing thing and get in there, and they're carting my mom back, and they're throwing papers at me. They're trying to tell me what was going on, and I just couldn't think. I was so overwhelmed. I was so scared. And I just remember the whole time over there, I just kept saying to my mom, I'm so mad at you. I'm so mad at you. I can't think of anything else to say to her, but I am just so mad at you. Why do you have to be so stubborn? I'm so mad at you. And I just remember how heavy that day was, and like just all the emotions, and I'm trying to make all the calls. And fortunately, she made it through the procedure, and it was a very, very close call. At one point, since we didn't anticipate being there, my mom said, can you go home and get my bag? And I was like, yeah, of course. My sister had shown up and other family had shown up, and so I was free to go do that and get some rest. I told him, I said, I'm probably gonna take a nap too because I'm tired. I went straight to the casino, and I remember like I just needed to decompress, and of course by now that was my coping mechanism. And I remember just sitting there just mindlessly hitting the button, and all of a sudden my first jackpot, I won a progressive. Wasn't a lot, but it was just enough. And I remember just like kind of cementing that feeling of like, oh, this is good for me. This does make me feel better. And I even took that money and I helped my mom pay her hospital deductible with it. And I remember telling my mom that, you know, like I won my jackpot, but before that, like I missed all the phone calls of like my sister saying, where are you? Mom needs this, mom needs that. Where are you? It's been hours. And so that kind of just got me out of there. But it just, that moment I think cemented to me that, oh, well, if I spend a little bit more money, I'm gonna make money and I can make my life easier. So before that, I don't think I was chasing money. But in that moment, it was like, oh, this is really nice.
Yeah. Like, what was the thought process like? You leave the hospital, you go straight to the casino. Is there a thought, or is it reactionary? Do you just drive straight there?
I think it was just reactionary, honestly. It was just like it was just like something in me was like, I need to decompress, and this is the place. It would be like the equivalent of somebody who was struggling with drinking. They'd be like, I need a drink.
Yeah.
It would be the exact equivalent. I need to gamble. Like, I've got to get away from this, and so that was my reaction. So I would say it was very much reactionary.
So following this day, it's now been cemented in your brain that gambling could be a way to come into some money very quickly. How does your story progress from this point?
I think from that moment, I started gambling more regular. I started spending more. You know, before I was paying my bills and putting money in savings and doing those things I needed to needed to adult. But I think for me, as my relationship continued to kind of be this up and down, you know, a lot of harm was happening there. I was worried about, you know, the situation with my mom, and I had learned that, you know, gambling felt good and I can win money and maybe just make myself feel better. And I think maybe even an underlying, like if I had some financial security, maybe I could not worry about relationships, and maybe whatever the irrational parts of how gambling could help my life, I made rational. I made irrational thoughts seem rational, and I was like, oh, this makes sense because it's what I wanted to do. It's what made me feel better, and I had to justify it in some way to myself.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it started to kind of progress to spending more money, starting to kind of feel the pinch of the finances. Like now I'm having to maybe pay the electric bill 2 weeks late. Started kind of pushing back bills, started using my credit cards more. And then it just continued to progress until I was probably gambling for about 5-7 years. You know, life is continuing on. And I think that for some reason, it just kind of started, like my relationship with gambling started to up. And then I was now not paying my electric bill at all, or I was paying it 2 months late when I got a cutoff notice, and not getting anything to savings. So any kind of emergency went on my credit cards. It started to be like, I don't even want to gamble. Like I'd be at the casino and just be like, why am I here? You know, I'm so far behind on everything. I owe everybody money. You know, my friends who used to invite me to do things like go Black Friday shopping, and like they just stopped asking me because I would gamble all my money and couldn't go. And, you know, things like that started happening in my life. And I don't know, I just kind of sunk into the chaos of it, the isolation, and it just really grabbed hold.
Yeah. So At this point in your story, you've been gambling for how long total, you think? About 7 years?
Yeah, about 7 years in is when the chaos really started to sink in. And then I probably continued to gamble to harm over those next 7 years. I mean, just debt, financial, physically, I was hurting myself because I wasn't taking care of myself. I, at this point, was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, stomach issues, just lots of things were happening. And then about 2018, I don't know, 3 or 4 years before I stopped gambling, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. Instead of really addressing what that meant and what I was going to have to go through, I really leaned into the gambling to help me really deal with those emotions. I hadn't had kids yet, and now the ability to have my own children was going to be taken away from me. I know there were so many other ways to have children, but for me, I was always hopeful that I was going to be a mom one day and have my own kids. And even though not everything was in place for that to happen, I think that finality, it hurt me more than I've ever, I think, acknowledged until just really the last year of my recovery here. And I remember talking to a therapist one day, and I'm like, I am just really struggling with feeling any way about life. And she's like, well, let's get you on some medication to help. I was telling her about the anxiety and panic attacks I was having and everything. And they put me on a medicine called Effexor. Now, mind you, I didn't say anything about the gambling or the addictive behaviors I was having. And that medicine, it numbed every emotion I had. And I think if I had been honest, she would have been like, we would never put you on that. But I had I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about the harm I was causing. I didn't care about myself. That medicine just let me not feel anything. So my gambling became worse, and I just spent my paychecks. I would get paid, and in 30 minutes, my paychecks would be gone. I was that person that would be in the casino and gamble down to $2 because I knew I had to put gas in my car to get home. It wasn't until late 2020 that, I really started having thoughts of I don't want to be here anymore. And I started thinking about how I was not going to be here anymore. And I think it really, really scared me. And after a binge one night, I was watching a show, and it was right before Christmas, and I didn't really have any gifts and didn't know what I was going to do. I was watching a show about food addiction. In this show, this woman was talking about how she felt before she ate, how she felt while she was eating the meal, and how she felt after the meal. Before she ate the meal, she was like, oh, I can't wait to eat. How she felt eating the meal was euphoric, high, oh, this is the best thing in the world. And how she felt after eating the meal, and we're not talking a hamburger and fries, we're talking 6 hamburgers, 6 fries, wash it down with 2 shakes, She felt the self-loathing, the hate, and I just remember her saying this, I don't understand why I'm killing myself over food. And I connected with that so much because I didn't really see addiction growing up. I didn't have an understanding of that gambling could be harmful. I just didn't have this awareness. And when she said that, I connected so much to that with my own gambling, how I felt before I gambled, how I felt while gambling, and how I felt walking out of the casino after I'd lost everything, the self-hate, the self-loathing. And then it just kind of really connected with, I'm killing myself with my gambling because I'm having these thoughts of, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm physically hurting myself. I'm mentally hurting myself. I'm financially hurting myself. I didn't understand why I was doing that to myself.
Coming to this realization, seeing the show, beginning to think about, what had been going on with the gambling, was that the turning point? Was that when things began to get better?
Yeah, I think in that moment, I was like, oh, I've got an addiction. I'm struggling with an addiction. And then it was kind of the thought of, well, I'm the only one that can't do this, right? I'm sure people haven't experienced this kind of life that I'm living. And so I decided that I was going to just stop. was going to stop gambling. You know, I had addressed other issues in my life when I had to tackle my health with the cancer and, you know, my health with the diabetes. Like, I had to lose weight. I'd left the abusive relationship. Just all these things I had tried to change. I never addressed the gambling. And so I think for the first time, I was just like, I'm going to try not to gamble. And I lasted about 60 days. And then I was triggered by my ex.
Struggling with an addiction can make you feel like you're all alone. But trust me, it doesn't have to be that way. At Right Choice Recovery, a family-owned and operated treatment center in New Jersey, we are here for you. And we're dedicated to helping you break free from addiction and change your life for the better. Whether you're struggling with substances or a gambling addiction, this is the spot for you. With personalized care, real support, and a team that understands exactly what you're going through, we're here to walk with you on your journey to recovery. Because recovery is possible. And it all starts with the right choice. Check the description of this video today for more information.
I ended up on a week-long binge of gambling, you know, every day after work, you know, all the weekend. And I won the most money that I ever won gambling in that week. And I lost it all in that week as well. And that brought me to some really defining moments for me, some very, very scary moments. That was the turning point for me. I remember the second to the last day before I stopped gambling, I had won a huge jackpot. And we're not talking like, you know, new house kind of money, but a nice used car kind of money. I remember when the guy came over, and he's somebody I'd seen over the years. You know, you kind of build a relationship with the casino workers, and you kind of like, you know them on a first name basis. You don't know anything about their life outside of it, but you know, you have that casino relationship.
Yeah.
And I remember him paying me out, and he just looked at me and he said, "Now you're gonna go home with this, right?" And I just remember just being so offended. Like, I was incredulous. Like, of course I'm gonna go home with this. Like, this is a lot of money and I need this. This could really change things for me. And 8 hours later, as he's leaving his shift, we lock eyes. I'm in the same chair. And I have been betting huge bets. And I had like lost all the way down to, I don't know, $2,000-3,000. And I just remember him looking at me, and he just kind of shook his head. And in that moment, it was like all the shame that I'd been just kind of suppressing and kind of like carrying around with me, it just came up. And I was so sick to my stomach, and I was just like, I don't know. I just instantly cashed out and went to my car, and I was just like, I didn't even recognize myself. And it was just like, he knew something. He knew I wasn't gonna leave with it. But I had lost all that money, and that chasing wouldn't leave me. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it, even though I was also thinking about the bigger picture of what I've done in my life and how did I get there. I was still thinking about all the money I lost. And so I went back the next day, and I gambled all of that money plus whatever else I could get out of my checking account. I just remember for the first time, really, the thoughts of self-harm were so strong. Like, they were so strong. And I was thinking how I could do it. And I was sitting in my car, and I went to pick up my phone because I knew like I'd have missed calls and all these. And a picture of my mom and my sisters came up on my phone from my sister's wedding. And I just remember thinking, I can't do that to them. Like, they love me so much, no matter what I've done to them through this addiction. I can't do that to them. And it was just kind of like that moment that something changed in me of like, I don't really want to die. I wanted to actually live. And because I wasn't living, I wanted the addiction to die, but I wanted to live my life, and I hadn't lived my life in so long. I wanted to live it free of the addiction and the hurt and the pain and the chaos. But that was so scary to me because I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I didn't know that recovery was a thing. And so that was my moment that everything changed for me.
And what does your recovery look like now, going on 4 years?
I went to my mom the following day, and I just told her what was going on, and she had an idea, but she didn't know how bad. She didn't know how bad I was feeling. And she knew of somebody who'd gone to GA, and then it kind of like dawned on me, oh yeah, that little tiny number on the door when you walk in. And so we called the helpline, and I got some bored kid, and they were like, somebody will text you the meeting dates and all that. So I was like, okay, all right. I mean, I was just so deflated. Here I was like, it's not like I expected them to roll out the red carpet and be like, yes, she's finally accepted that she is done with gambling or whatever. But I did expect maybe a little more compassion, a little more like, yeah, we're gonna, get to these meetings, talk to people, kind of give me an idea of what I was gonna expect. But I didn't get that. But I still also knew that if I truly wanted to live my life, I had to figure this out, regardless of the setbacks. And so they did text me several hours later with the meetings. Attended my first meeting the following Saturday, and that started my journey with GA. I went to a therapist the following week, started my journey with therapy. What I was seeing in those spaces is that there wasn't somebody like me. I would go into these meetings and it was a room full of men, and though they were kind and welcoming and they understood the gambling addiction, they didn't understand how my life was falling apart. And I was going through a divorce and I was just a mess. I would walk into these meetings and I'd be crying, and they'd be like, there, let's read the yellow book. They didn't know what to say to me. All they knew, but they were there, they were trying to support me best that they could. And so I kept thinking, there's gotta be other women out there who are experiencing this or impacted by this, but I wasn't finding them. So I started looking online, and I still wasn't finding them. And I found podcasts, which were so amazing. They were so helpful. But even in the podcast, the female voices were very, very sparse. And so I was like, well, maybe I just start sharing my journey, and maybe somebody else who's looking will connect that way. And so I started sharing on Instagram about, my mile markers in recovery. The first 60-day keychain I got, or I remember talking about my 9th paycheck that I didn't spend gambling, and kind of those things. And people did start reaching out to me. And then a fellow podcaster reached out and she said, hey, I do a podcast about 12 steps. And she's like, I'd love to have you on. She's like, I had gambling in my story as well. And I was like, great, fantastic, because podcasts have been so great for me. And so I did her podcast. I loved the experience. I loved the format. And I'm like, well, she didn't really focus on gambling specific. And I thought, well, maybe I could do a gambling specific podcast for women and share whatever resources and things that were helpful for me. And so when I got to start thinking about it, I had like a gift card that I'd gotten for Christmas, and my mom said, well, let's go get you a mic with it. And so we went and got my first mic, which was a Yeti, which is what everybody was using at the time. So when I was trying to figure out what to name this podcast, it's like I went back through my journals and I thought, well, I need something here. And the word broke kept showing up in so many different ways. And it's kind of a play on like the financial mess that gambling creates. But also I felt broke physically, mentally, spiritual. Like gambling broke me, not only financially, but just in every way. And so I don't know how it all came together, but I was like, the Broke Girl Society. I like it. And so I just went with it, and I designed the logo and everything myself. And I started recording. And I remember it took me like 100 tries to record that first podcast. And I was like, finally it was midnight, the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. And I was just like, I'm gonna record this. And that was the first episode. And that was released July 1st of 2021. So 4 months into my recovery.
July 1st, you said? So coming up on the 4-year anniversary of the podcast as well.
Yep.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
In the course of that 4 years, how has your community grown, and how has that helped to sustain your recovery?
Yeah, so after I released the podcast, I started getting people kind of reaching out to me. It was hard finding women that wanted to share their stories. So I just kind of kept, as people reached out to me and we had conversations, and they would be like, I'd like to share my story. And so I started to build like this small community, and I thought, man, it'd be great to have like a safe space for all of us to kind of check in with each other and support each other. Created a Facebook because I was 42 at the time. So that just seemed like what was next. And so I created a Facebook group to go along with the podcast so that as listeners started to find it, that they knew that we had a support group as well. You know, when it first came out, maybe 20 listens, and a lot of those are probably my friends and family. And, you know, now we're thousands of listens each episode, and women are like, I want to share my story because this story was so impactful for me. And, you know, we're able to do it in a safe way because we're not a video podcast, we're an audio podcast. So women feel safer to come on and share their story. I think by having these conversations and creating safe spaces for women, hopefully we're tackling the stigma and shame around gambling addiction for women.
I love that. So in the description of this video, we're going to have links to the Facebook group as well as to your podcast. If a woman's watching this right now and she's on that fence of, do I want to admit that I have this problem? Do I want to go seek out help? What would your message to her be?
My message to anybody trying to figure out, is this something I want to explore? It's always going to be curious. Be curious what's going to be helpful. Knowledge is going to be one of the best tools that you can use. Better understand your relationship with gambling. There's a lot of great resources out there that will help you do it. Talk to a therapist, talk to somebody. Talking's so helpful. As long as we just keep being curious about the different 12-step programs, the different support groups, the different options you have, you're gonna find a path that works for you. If you're a woman or somebody who identifies as a woman and you wanna come into the BGS because you're looking for a safe space, you know, we can help you with that curiosity. We can support your questions and show you the path that we're all on.
And what's the secret to staying away from gambling for almost 4 years?
It's building a life you don't want to escape from.
Hope that you enjoyed hearing Christina's story. Maybe there was something in there that you can resonate with. I know there was for me. If you're interested in hearing another story of someone in recovery from a gambling addiction, check out this video next. Let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.